Hello, hello, my wonderful listeners from all around the world, and welcome to True Tall Tales, where reality is stranger than fiction. Whether you're stuck in traffic, pretending to work, sweating it out at the gym, or scrubbing your bathroom like a domestic warrior, thank you for tuning in. Your support means everything, and honestly, if you love what you hear, tell your mates, tell your mum, your dog, your barista, whoever will listen. Because let's be real, word of mouth is the best marketing strategy, and I'm not made of money. I've got to pay rent, and my landlord does not accept exposure as currency. Now let me tell you about last week. I was in the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia, living my best life with my pecs and my six-pack, until Mother Nature decided to spice things up with a cyclone. Yep, a full-blown cyclone. And guess what? This part of Australia isn't supposed to get cyclones. Turns out the ocean's been heating up, the climate's been shifting, and nature is out here rewriting the rule book. So being the curious person that I am, I'm slightly concerned for my safety. I went down the research rabbit hole and stumbled across an amazing Substack called Honey Drops. It breaks down the complex environmental stuff in a way that even I can understand. So naturally, I had to get the mastermind behind it on the podcast. Not only is this guest a sustainability expert, but they are also making real change in the world, which means today's episode is going to be a mix of eye-opening, mind-expanding, and possibly panic-inducing, but in a fun way. So let's dive deep and welcome to True Tall Tales, Dan Leverington. Woo!
Thank you, Sonny. Very excited to be here.
Good. Glad to have you on. I'm glad to have someone intelligent on the show because I'm not the most intelligent, but I am, but it's a different type of intelligence.
You are very intelligent.
Oh, stop. Look, let's go straight into it, which is a good segue for True Tall Tales. As you know, a cyclone just kind of hit the Gold Coast, Brisbane in Queensland, Australia. And from my knowledge of what I know, and you can elaborate on this, you know, my family lives in the Whitsundays, so they always get category 5s, but it's like tropical cyclones, they call them, because the water, I should say, has to be above 26 degrees. And that's why the Gold Coast and Brisbane and Byron Bay, New South Wales and Australia, they don't get tropical cyclones because the water doesn't go to 26 degrees, correct?
Correct.
So what has happened now? Why are we getting cyclones? This is the first one. It was meant to be a category 2, went down to a category 1 and dropped down as cyclones usually do when they go into land, but it still was a tropical cyclone. Why is this happening?
Yeah, for sure. So there was a tropical cyclone in 1952, there was one in 1974, and there was one in 2017. But the one in 2017, Debbie, didn't actually make landfall, and yet it still caused the 2017 floods in Lismore, which were considered at the time, you know, a 1 in 1,000 year flood. They then had floods in 2022, and then they've just had floods again, right? So from a scientific perspective, the warmer water that you speak about is coming further south. So if you have a look at the charts that the Bureau of Meteorology publicly release, the water or the sea surface temperature in 2024 was 0.89 degrees warmer than the long-term average. Now, 0.89 degrees warmer doesn't sound like a lot, but in fact it's enormous because it's tipped the sea surface temperature over that threshold that you spoke about, and so it's meant that we've had a tropical cyclone make landfall way further south than we'd ever expect it to, and that is why, you know, the economic and the social impacts far outweigh any of the damage done, because we all had to go back under stay-at-home orders. There's small businesses that weren't able to open. There was staff that weren't able to be paid. So that, you know, there's many ramifications of that ocean warming.
And look, it was good because it didn't happen to be that bad, which, you know, you had a lot of people say, oh my God, after all that, because, you know, I was in the Gold Coast at the time. So, you know, planes shut down. We couldn't leave the house. They were doing evacuation centers, and it was really intense, right? And it was like, hey, this category 2 is going to hit Brisbane and the Gold Coast and Byron. And as you said before, they don't get cyclones. So Was the news and the government a bit over the top? Yes, but I think that's a good thing because these areas are very condensed with such a big population and they're not used to it. So places where my parents live in the Whitsundays, they're used to it, but there's not millions of people living in such a small small amount of space, I would say.
Yeah.
And people around here don't know what to do. They didn't know to fill your bath up with water or bucket so you can use that as toilet water because the water will be switched off. Just little things like that. So it was kind of a positive thing that it did happen because, if people who don't believe in global warming is a real thing. And if it is happening, it seems like, okay, if we're getting cyclones now and the ones that you mentioned in the past, then they are going to happen again. Yeah. And so now that people are aware of it, maybe they're going to build the buildings differently. Maybe, you can't be beachfront and people are aware now and go, okay, cool, it's category 2. We know what to do now. And everyone's just more aware now because everyone was panicking because they weren't used to it. That's probably the positive, would you say?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like the general, from like we're down in the Northern Rivers, so effectively from Grafton all the way up to past Noosa were under a cyclone warning, and that was because even though the Bureau of Meteorology has phenomenal radar systems and tracking systems, the cyclone was moving around a lot. So initially it looked like it was going to cross where you are on the Gold Coast. It eventually, took a northwest trajectory. And so it was much closer to Brisbane and then went up the coast towards the Sunshine Coast. I think a lot of people in the local community learnt a few things, but then also had reinforced that the resilience, particularly in the Northern Rivers after the 2022 floods, has really paid off. So like one of the things that I noticed the most was just how calm everyone was in the lead up to it. Initially, we were told that it was going to make landfall on the Wednesday night or the Thursday morning. And so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, there was a lot of people out getting groceries or a lot of people out getting fuel, getting ice, getting sandbags for their shops or their homes. But I didn't see anyone kind of losing their minds, so to speak. And then I think the fact that, the arrival of the cyclone was a couple of days later, again, just meant that the human life wasn't at risk because everyone just knew that they had to stay at home. And I was actually really impressed by how well people adapted to that.
I love that as well, the community side of it, which is really, really good. Yeah.
Like we knew that it was going to pass. We hoped that it wouldn't hit too strongly. And some people say it's a non-event. I actually disagree. I think it is the best case scenario. I mean, like, it makes me wonder what their metrics of success look like, right? Like, were they hoping for a path of destruction through neighborhoods where, like, roofs were ripped off? Like, it's a little bit bizarre that people are kind of throwing their hands up in the air at the moment.
Yeah, that they're wanting that. But no, it was, and now that you look at it, like look at all the beaches, I don't know how they are in Byron Bay, but all up on the Gold Coast, it's like they've got to spend $50 billion, I think it is.
It's a lot of money, yeah.
To get all the sand in again, because all the, the Gold Coast is known for their famous beaches of sand stretching, and now it's just cliffs because all the beaches are gone and you can't really lay there. It's just like, you walk there and then it's just a big giant cliff and a little bit of sand and the water goes all the way up now. So it's like, where do we sunbake? Where do we go? And all these things. So people don't realize that, global warming and climate change is also changing where we live and how our beaches are. So it's such a domino effect that people have to be educated that this is a real thing. And this is a good segue of the cyclone happening, of that just happened last week, and you working in sustainability. And that's why I've got you on the show, because, I caught up with you not long ago and I really wanted to talk, as you know, I asked you a million questions, which I'm probably going to do now, about, I feel like with sustainability, Dan, it's kind of like people know the word, we know what it is, but I feel like it's getting better. And when I say getting better, I feel like is it got to do with marketing? Because for me, everyone's like, oh, sustainability, okay, cool, we're trying to do our bit to make the world a better place. And the way I call myself, I think I'm a little bit better because I know you and other people that work in sustainability, but for average people, I call it the basic bitch of people in sustainability. So when I say basic bitch, I would say we've got our green bins to put our gardening in, our leaves. We've got our normal bin to put our rubbish in, like plastic and all that. And then we've got our recycling bin, and we wash everything out, and our cans and our plastic and bottles and all things like that. And we know how to recycle. That's basic. Second thing is that we've got rid of plastic straws, and now we've got paper straws, and I only use paper straws. And that's kind of just where it is for people, that they think, and look, every bit counts, and don't get me wrong, but I think there's more to it, but we're not educated about it, or they're marketing wrong, or people don't care. But I know I'm asking you so many questions, but where I want to go with this is, how do we educate more people on sustainability, but making it in a cool way? Because I feel like people just turned a blind eye to it and just think, it is getting better though. That's why I've mentioned the things like the non-plastic straws, the coffee cups. Australians are big coffee drinkers, and, they'll bring their own cups and, or sit down and have it in a mug and things like that. So we are getting better in that way. No plastic bags at Woolworths and Coles when you go, or Aldi when you go shopping. It's all paper bags out, and people bringing their own bags. So we are getting better in all those terms of being basic bitch, but what do we need to do more to get better, or to educate people about, like, that global warming is a real thing, which crosses over to sustainability?
Yeah, I mean,
answer one of those questions.
No, they're all great questions. So I think initially a lot of emphasis was put on the individual. So as an individual, what is your carbon footprint? What kind of car are you driving? How often do you fly? What's your recycling look like? And I think that actually wasn't done by the sustainability professionals. So sustainability professionals are often looking at systems rather than individuals, because the plastic bags at the major supermarkets is a perfect example. So if one customer decided to take their own bags to Coles, for example, that's great, but it's actually not making a huge amount of difference, like you said. But if the major supermarkets decide en masse that they're not offering plastic bags, that's making a huge difference, because and for a few reasons. So, like, at the end of life cycle for that plastic bag, there's not landfill destination for it, because it's not even being given to the customer. But if you go in the other direction, the beginning of that life cycle, those bags are made out of oil, right? That's where plastics come from. And so if there's not the commercial demand from the supermarkets for those plastic bags, then all of a sudden that product no longer becomes a high revenue generating product stream for those companies that produce them. I think the other really important bit about sustainability is, often people think about not only what their personal footprint is, but also, well, I can just keep living my life the way that I'm living my life as long as I plant trees, pay for offsets when I fly, however that looks. And that's both at the individual level and the organizational level. But what we've seen over the past 5 years in particular is companies are now looking at sustainability and climate change from a perspective of not only what impact am I having on the world. So if I have a product, what is or a service, what goes into that product, what is the end of life for that product. But probably more importantly is what we've just gone through with the cyclone, which is what is the impact of a changing climate on my business or my life. So at the individual level, if you currently work in hospitality, if you work in retail, you just lost out on shifts, right? Your place of work was not open during the cyclone. You can't say that you worked, so therefore you can't get your hourly rate, which means that all of a sudden you're anywhere between 10 and 30% down on your weekly income, right? That has a huge knock-on effect, particularly for people working in service industries. If you're a small business owner, you haven't been able to open. So not only are you not able to provide the hours for your staff, you're also not making your profit margins, which means that you're now in a hole. So the government then has to step in and say, we're launching programs for small business owners and employees that were negatively impacted by the cyclone. kind of like job seeker.
Yep.
But that money has to come from the taxpayer, right? So all of a sudden, this cyclone that at a high level looks like it was a non-event, nothing happened, and the government overreacted.
Mm-hmm.
Actually turns out that it's had significant economic impacts at the individual level, at the company level, and at the state and federal government level. And then you've got the insurers that come in, so they have to pay out for any property damage. But then those premiums are going to increase for the individuals, homes, and businesses that claim. So it's this really quite intricate system that all spawns out of this one event that is caused because the increased temperature of sea surfaces. So I think the worst thing for someone to do is to feel overwhelmed, because as individuals, day to day, we can only control a certain amount, right? But then if you go up one layer as an individual, and it's like, well, who's your energy provider? Do they get most of their energy from natural resources like fossil fuels, or do they get their energy from renewable energy?
Can I add something into that? Because you've just and it's what you're saying right now. It's funny you say that, because I had a housemate when I used to live in Sydney in the inner west. And I had a friend that I lived with, and he worked in sustainability. So he was like, hey, when you join the electricity company, like switch it on, can you do this one? Because it's all renewable energy. I was like, no problems. I'm into that as well. Didn't even know that was a thing. Once again, basic bitch with, sustainability and stuff. I didn't even know that was a thing. Yep. So he's like, all right, cool. So we get that. I had like 3 housemates. So it was 4 of us all together. We got the bill. When I received the bill for electricity, it was so expensive, Dan. And I get it. It probably costs more. But what I'm saying is, how do we... Why? My first question is, why is it expensive? Because it wasn't just a couple of dollars extra. I was paying like, maybe $60 more than I would in my electricity. And as you know, inflation, everything's going up. Everything's so expensive these days. It costs $15 for a beer. People just can't afford shit. So why would I not just go for a normal electricity company? I'm saving money, individual for myself, than to be paying more, and no one else is doing it. So why should I have to? Is it even making a difference? Do you get what I mean? Because I feel like that's what a lot of people are going to think. And I feel like it's only the sustainability people like yourself and my friend that do that. But for basic bitches like me and other people out there, I don't think they're going to do that based on those reasons.
Yeah,
how do we make it cheaper?
And that's what the energy companies are working on. So like we know that over the past 30 years, solar in particular, but combined with wind, have now become the cheapest energy source globally for 83% of the population. There are existing government subsidies for fossil fuel companies, which means that the market rate for their energy is not an accurate reflection of what it is, because the government is effectively giving them money back for producing that energy, which brings down the cost of energy. So I'm not saying that this is for everyone, right? But if you are wanting to do something different, and if you are wanting to play your part, that is one option. That is one option for you to look at. When there is a gap between the general market rate and the renewable option or the greener option, that gap is called the green premium. And that's an economic term that effectively means that you are willing to pay slightly more in order to choose a more sustainable product. And that, like I said, that is not for everyone. And like I'm not saying like everyone has to do that, but you should be aware that the option is there for you.
It might be a dumb question, but is the normal electricity companies that are burning coal and polluting our world, are they more cheaper because they've been around for longer and there's just more of them? And then is the renewable energy more expensive because there's not that many of them? Like, what's the reason why it's more expensive? Is that the reason?
Yeah, like that plays into it. The government subsidies play into it. Yes. No, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, we'll leave it at that, because all I want to say in conclusion for that bit of the question is, if it was kind of the same. If an electricity company come out that was the renewable energy and said, "Hey, we're the same price as normal. Why would you not switch over to us?"
Totally.
I'm telling you now,
People
everyone would
don't.
switch over.
Yeah.
It would
For
be
sure.
they're still getting the money.
Yeah.
No one can compete, and then it would just feel like the whole of Australia would just. Why would you not switch over to? And that would be a good ad. Why not just switch over? It's the same price. You're doing your bit, and everyone wants to do that bit. But the moment it's like way more expensive, I get that. It's hard to live today. Everyone's kind of broke.
But then but then you have a look at states like South Australia. So they've had multiple days where 100% of the electricity used on the South Australian grid has been from renewables. And that's something that they're building up towards so that they have enough battery capacity in order to hold on to the energy being generated by solar and wind to then pump into the grid as it's needed. And like we're well and truly along that journey. Like that's not sci-fi.
Okay. And no, you go.
I was going to say, and then there's a few other things you can do. So I'd have a look at who you're banking with. There are some banks out there that refuse to invest in fossil fuels,
really?
and I say invest because your bank, depending on who they are, but I would say most of the large ones, they use the money that is sitting in your account in order to invest in projects. Like that is like you're giving them your money to invest in projects. And so if
do you mean that like they've got my money, the interest that they make, they're investing it into sustainability stuff? Is that what you mean by that?
No, into fossil fuel projects. So now they're starting to invest into renewables, but the ones that don't invest in fossil fuel projects or companies, they only invest in renewables if they're investing in the energy space. So I would just have a look at that. There's a few. You can find them pretty easily.
Just at the top of your head, I'm with ING. Are they good?
I don't know. They're Dutch, so maybe. But the ones that I'm thinking of, and this is a good segue into B Corp companies, but like Bank Australia, Adelaide and Bendigo Bank, for example. But B Corp companies are worth having a look at because under the B Corp certification, there's companies across every industry in Australia, effectively, products or services. They have to go through a certification process that takes into account their impact on the environment, how they treat their workers, how they interact with their community, for example. And so what they say is these are companies that are making profit with purpose. And so if you want to have a look at beer companies, so there's Four Pines, there's Stone and Wood. If you want to have a look at fashion labels like Spell, if you want to have a look at liquor or spirits companies like Brookies, like these companies, not only are they producing great products and services, but then they're also very conscious of their impact on the environment, do a lot to reduce their impact on the environment, and then also support local communities as well. And there's about 600 of those in Australia.
Wow. See, already you've made me, by having this chat to you and all the listeners that are listening to this, I just told you, a couple of minutes ago that I was a basic bitch. And now, not only am I just talking about the recycling bins and using paper straws and stuff, now I know that I can check with my bank to see, if they fund into renewable energy and what was the other one you said? Because you've just said so many now. What was the other one?
B Corps.
Oh, yeah, B Corps, yes.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Good. See, this is good. The electricity companies, that's a really good one as well, which I kind of knew. But for people who don't know this at Basic Bitches, this is good for them to go, hey, how do I make change in my own way? Do you have any more examples?
So I'm going to go up to the systems level. So, and bear with me while I go into a little bit of government regulation because it's actually pretty exciting. So as of the 1st of January, companies this year. Yep. Companies with more than 500 employees or $1 billion annual revenue have to start reporting to the government across their climate impact, if you will. And so the way that that's broken down is across how the company is run in terms of how the decision makers are taking into account not only the company's impact on the environment, but also the environment's impact on the company. And so that's their strategy, that's their governance models, that's their risk management, and then also how they're measuring that. From next year, it then gets to probably another 2,000 companies, and they're the companies that have anywhere between like 200 and 500 employees, for example. And the year after that is any company with 50 to 199 employees. And the reason why I say this is, even though it's not obvious how much work is being done, these companies, a lot of them are working very hard to ensure that they're moving towards renewable energy as their power source. They're really focused on a massive reduction of their waste, as well as their usage of water. And the reason why that's important is because they're starting to get a lot of commercial pressure from investors saying, what are you doing in order to ensure that your company is going to be sustainable long-term from a financial perspective? And I think that's the biggest change over the past 5 years. So this brings Australia in line with 35 other countries, UK, EU, Singapore, Japan, Korea, Argentina, for example, certain states in the US, where they're saying, we want to ensure that our countries are as safe as possible over the coming decades, and we want to minimize the occurrence of natural disasters like the cyclone that we just had. Therefore, we need to make sure that our economies are protected by our companies in those economies understanding the risks that they face. And so even though companies may not be speaking about it publicly, they're being directed to do this by the investor class. And the investor class are important because the investor class are the ones that give these companies money. And so the benefit of it being framed the way that it is, of the large companies having to report first, is that in order for them to have the full understanding of what their supply chain looks like, they need their suppliers to start feeding this information up to them. And so those companies with 200 to 500 employees and 50 to 199 employees are having to give this information up to these largest companies, which means in order to get that information, they need to start doing this work, and they need to start reducing their emissions, their waste, and their water policies. And so you're seeing this enormous push on the corporate side. Again, not always obvious to the consumer, but like there is real change happening, and it's being driven at the international level. And Australia has a really great opportunity to really benefit commercially from our companies doing this.
Okay, Dan. So as I said many times, I'm a basic bitch with this. So I'm processing this properly from what you just explained to me. The government has implemented this for big companies, say, for example, big supermarkets in Australia, Coles, Woolworths, Aldi. There's one in every town and city around Australia. They would be taking up so much land. They'd be using so much electricity. They'd be using so much water. Like the population that they're serving around how big Australia is, like you're basically saying that the governments are like, hey, you have to have good sustainability, because think of how much electricity like a Coles or a Woolworths is using, and there's like millions of them around Australia and stuff like that. So if they're not,
next time you go to the supermarket, have a look and see, because I reckon there'll probably be a fair bit of signage around talking about how that supermarket or that building is powered by solar power.
So is Aldi, Woolworths, and Coles solar powered around Australia?
A lot of them have already either made the conversion to putting rooftop solar on, or are in the process of doing it.
But that would make sense, right? Because if there's so many of them and they're burning so much coal to get the electricity, if they're just doing it by solar power, then it's better for Earth.
Correct.
Like, it just makes sense.
For all these large companies.
And they can afford to do it.
Totally. But like for all these large companies, just type in their company name, type in sustainability report, and they've been doing sustainability reports for years.
I got a follow-up question now.
Yeah.
Now that I'm processing this, I'm a medium basic bitch. So does that mean that us as people have voted this into Parliament, or who made this rule in the Australian government that said, hey, it's the big companies that have to start with this more before everybody else because you're using more than anyone else and you're making money out of it. So you need to set an example, right? Is that how that works?
So post 2008, the global financial crisis, the GFC, there was a financial board called the the Financial Stability Board, so the FSB. The FSB had a look at the global financial system and said, what are the top risks to the financial system that we can prevent so that we never have a 2008 experience again? Climate change was determined by the Financial Stability Board to be an existential threat to the financial economy globally, right? And so because they interact with the investors, like the global investors realized that if something wasn't done about climate change, that all of their investments would be negatively impacted. And so the investors went to the large companies and said, what are you doing to ensure that our money doesn't go to zero because you haven't been taking this seriously? And then as a part of the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015 by all 193 countries, signed for Australia, or on behalf of Australia, by Tony Abbott. So this is a bipartisan issue. A part of the Paris Agreement when it comes to sustainability reporting is that this would be rolled out across each of the countries. And so because of the way that it's been set out by the investors initially and then by the international governments, this is how they know it will work the best, because the large companies have been given the past 3 to 4 years heads up that this was coming, so they've had time to prepare for it. Then their supply chain have been told this is coming, so you've got time to prepare for it. And so as of 1st of January, the largest companies have to start reporting against what's called the Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards. And that's going to feed through their supply chain. So in 4 years' time, we'll have 6,000 companies in Australia reporting to the government regulators.
And if they don't, do they get fined or something?
Yeah, it's because where it sits under the legislation, which is the Corporations Act, Chapter 2, it is set up to be the same as a financial disclosure to ASIC. The penalties of misreporting to ASIC with your financial disclosures is personal liability for the board of directors, which can lead to personal fines or, in extreme cases, jail time.
Okay, good.
So it's serious.
Okay, so you've got people like Donald Trump and other people out there like, global warming isn't a real thing.
Yep.
Cyclones are happening for millions of years on Earth. You get storms all the time. You get fires. This is just a money-making business, blah, blah, blah. Like, how do you, the people that are out there, and look, people have different opinions, right? How do we, I know, you think just having a cyclone last week in Brisbane and Gold Coast and they never get them and stuff, you think that would be proof? How do we prove to them that this is real? And let me tell you, people who work in sustainability, it's not as if I know sustainability are billionaires and it's like, I'm a sustainability person, I'm a multi-millionaire. Do you get what I mean? It's not a very rich job to be in. So why would humans are run by greed and money? Like, this is literally people just trying to save the world. So why else are they trying, like, you know what I mean? I don't even know how to answer my own question.
No. It's a really good question. So there's, I think first and foremost, you have to think about where is people's money coming from. So in the case of Trump, some of his biggest donors were the oil and gas industry. More coal mines closed in the US under Trump than they did under Biden. Little known fact. Because coal doesn't make commercial sense at a mass scale anymore. It is an old technology. Gotcha. I think there's two things about sustainability, climate, nature, and biodiversity that I think are really important. Firstly, it's a fool's errand to try to convince everyone, right? It's never going to happen. Like we live in such a divided society at the moment that if the messenger is not the right person, there is almost 50% of society who are not going to believe what they say, no matter how many facts they have to back them up. So trying to convince 100% of people is just impossible. I think secondly is people often frame this as we have to save the planet. And I could not disagree with that more. And the reason why I disagree with that so strongly is the planet will always be here. I heard a speech in Sydney last week from Kumi Naidu, who used to be the head of Amnesty International. And he said, what we're trying to do is ensure that the conditions on this planet are fit for humans to live. That is what we're trying to do. We are trying to ensure that the conditions that have allowed humanity to thrive stay in place. Because if it gets too hot, and our bodies can't adapt, and the natural disasters get so intense, that is going to wipe out humanity. In actuality,
this is very well said, by the way.
In actuality, the planet will bounce back to its natural being faster if we're not on it, right? Not to get too bleak, but like that. Like I think it's important to. The most selfish thing you could do is get involved in sustainability, because you're literally trying to preserve you, your family, however you want to frame it. Some people like to think in 7 generations' time. We have prided ourselves in Australia growing up in the best country in the world. Those of us born in the 80s, we had the 90s, the early 2000s, beach culture. Summer was just always phenomenal.
Yeah.
When was the last time you had a phenomenal summer, right? Sydney, it's totally changed. The rains just do not go away. We have an obligation to the people who are going to come after us.
Correct.
For them to have the same opportunities as us.
Correct.
There's a lot of really interesting reading that people can do, whether it's James Lovelock, who talked about the Gaia hypothesis, whether it's Professor Tim Lenton, who talks about systems. The planet is a system. If you use more resources than you put back, the system's going to be out of whack. We've had a phenomenal amount of economic growth and civilization growth over the past 200 years since the Industrial Revolution. And all of us have benefited from that in some way. What is key at the moment is to understand that if we keep pushing that and we're just growing for the sake of growing, we're going to have some really severe negative consequences. And they're not going to be negative consequences that creep up on us. They're going to be negative consequences that accelerate and become stronger, hit us harder, and hang around for longer. So, for example, one of the biggest risks that insurers are worried about for Brisbane in particular, and they've been worried about this for 15 years, is for a cyclone to hit the city as a Category 3 or Category 4. And so that's why there was so much concern about Alfred in the week before it hit, because it had the potential to get to that strength, and thankfully it died off, which is why, kind of going full circle back to the start of the conversation, we dodged a bullet, right? It wasn't it's not that it was a non-event. We dodged a bullet. The issue for a Category 3 or 4 cyclone hitting Brisbane from like a damage perspective would be enormous. From an insurance perspective would be enormous. From an economic and social perspective, it would be enormous. And so I think this is kind of, the shot across the bow, so that hopefully we can start making some pretty significant changes. The benefit is, and if people check out Professor Tim Lenton, he talks a lot about positive tipping points. So just as there are negative tipping points that have led to, the increase in the fires in 2019, 2020, the floods in 2022, and now the cyclone, there's also positive tipping points. So he talks about the uptake of renewables is already starting to have a positive impact. So if you think about the Paris Agreement of 193 countries talks about limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. When that was signed, we were on target to increase 6 degrees, right? Which is, they can't even test for what that does to humanity. That's how extreme it is.
Wow.
We've now brought that down to 2.9, which is enormous, right? In 10 years, we've basically halved what the potential temperature increase is. And we effectively have to 2050 to get that down to 1.5, which I think, we just have to do it. Because if we don't, there's going to be negative consequences to us in Australia. But I mean, like, the Pacific Islands will be gone. Like, they just will not be there. And so they're very much on the front line when it comes to this global conversation as well.
And look, the scariest thing about this is that, like, we all know it's a real thing, and the ones that deny it and the ones that choose to ignore it and stuff like that. But, like, I think people forget, yes, we live in our own countries, but we're all in the same Earth. There's only one Earth. So if we fuck up Earth, like, that's it. Like, like, we can't, like, you can be on America, we can be in Australia, we can be in China, we can't go anywhere else. We can't even make it outside of Earth. Like, we still got 2 bloody people stuck on the moon that can't even be saved. I mean, not on the moon. They're stuck in the space station. We can't even get them right now.
Yeah.
Bless their souls. I feel so bad. That's a whole nother story. But what I'm saying is there's nowhere for us to go. So maybe Earth is best for humans to actually not exist because we're killing the rest of the creatures and the animals. There's so many layers to it. I just want to ask you, Dan, that's the bit that just it's like I'm watching a sci-fi film, but I'm living in it. That's what's I love sci-fi films.
I know. I think that's a crazy thing, and what a lot of people have started to really wrestle with is we grew up with sci-fi films and we loved them because they were in the future and they were fake. And now we're starting to see certain things that we've actually seen before, but it was entertainment.
The fact that AI is a real thing that we use every day. Hello.
Classic Skynet. I think the other thing is, like, just touching on the people who, I think there are people. So how about this? I reckon there's 3 groups of people that don't believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
First group of people are people who make money in those industries. There's a really famous quote by a guy called Upton Sinclair who speaks about don't ever expect someone to understand something that their pay packet demands that they don't understand. And I really like that quote because I think it gives you a level of empathy towards people in that situation, right?
Correct.
Like, if someone came to you and said, you can't work your job anymore because if you do, you're a bad person, you would literally tell them to fuck off. Right. And so, like, that can't be the approach. The approach has to be long term. How do we ensure that you can earn as much or more than you currently are working in an industry where we need your skills? There are so many transferable skills from the fossil fuel industry into the renewable energy. And we need the people working in those industries to be able to make that transition, which is often referred to as the just transition. So that's first and foremost. Second, I would say there are the group of people who, to put it bluntly, like, they're scared. And so, and the way, because it feels overwhelming. And so the way to deal with that is to ignore it. And I totally get that. Like, it is, that there are days that anyone who works in sustainability is scared out of their minds. But the difference is we actually have a sense of agency because we're working in the space. We see all the benefits of the progress that's being made, like all the things that we spoke about earlier. So I understand when people are coming from a position of fear. And so I try to, like I said to you, like I try to say, like, look at all of these great things that are happening. Look at the positive tipping points that are coming out of it. I'm not promising we're going to be okay, but there are so many people working on this globally that we've given ourselves, like, a really, really good shot. And then I think the third group is people are busy, man. Like, people are trying to hold down their job. People just don't have time to learn about this.
I know.
And
Basic
so,
bitches, see?
yeah, but like, but I don't think, like, there's nothing there's nothing nefarious about their activities, right? There's nothing where they're actively saying, this is bullshit, I don't believe in it, like this is like a green news scam, as Trump likes to call it. And so that's why I'm saying, like, we don't have to convince 100% of people. There are people in each of those camps that can be convinced, and there's a lot of people in those camps that can't be convinced, and I'm fine with that, because at a systems level, I know that everything is heading in the right direction. Where we need help is at the individual level for people to accelerate that by supporting with their wallets companies that are doing the right thing.
Does the human race need something where you said they just choose to ignore it and they don't want to learn, where, say, global warming happens and half of America goes underwater and it just gets flooded and it never comes back and it just doesn't exist anymore, and the whole world's like, holy fuck, this is crazy, that's literally never happened before? And then that's when humans start panicking. Is it something like that that's like, okay, let's get this shit together, let's everything 100% renewable energy, and that's what I feel like that's going to happen. And my question for you is it too late to fix it?
I don't think it's too late to fix it, and like, I really want to emphasize that, because I think a lot of the talking points that came out of particularly the oil and gas industry in the States, you can look into a podcast called Drilled, which covers this really well. Their first lot of messaging in the 60s and 70s, when they knew that climate change was real, their scientists were showing them data showing the impact that they were having on the planet, was it's bullshit. They're like, don't worry about it. They're the ones that came up with the individual carbon footprint to put the pressure on the individuals, so that they could keep selling those individuals oil. Where they've landed on now is kind of referred to as doomerism, which is, yes, climate change exists, like they all accept that, but it's too late to do anything about it. So keep doing what you're doing. Okay. And I actually think that's even more dangerous than the first one, because the first one is, it's your fault, do something about it, and you could do something about it. This one is, there is nothing that can be done, and so you're just going to have to watch all the natural disasters unfold, knowing that they're going to get worse. And that's why I think it's worse, and more malicious. But I think in terms of humans realizing that things need to be done, I mean, that's already happening. Like, there are people who were directly impacted by the fires of 2019, 2020, who are now working in the climate and sustainability space, who weren't previously. And the great thing about the sustainability space is there is such a flocking of people from all these different industries with all these different skill sets: accountants, lawyers, investment bankers, people with sales experience, people with marketing experience, people from technology, who all want to do good while doing their job, who it's either they've had kids or, that they've realized that they can do something about this. And it's incredibly inspiring, because you got some very, very smart cookies basically pegging their career to making a difference.
Do you know who a perfect example of that is?
Who?
Leonardo DiCaprio. Wins his Oscar and goes, you know what, just going to stay away from acting, and I'm just going to do everything I can to save Earth and bring attention to sustainability and global warming, which he's been doing for a very long time. And even Leo couldn't even make it cool, if you get what I mean by that. I love Leonardo DiCaprio. Anyway, go back to what you're saying.
But don't you find it fascinating that, and I think about human psychology a lot, about behavioral change, how to connect with people where they are. Because the most insidious things about the fossil fuel industry is that the executives have a lot of money to spend on a lot of adaptation changes to their houses. So they're not going to be the ones that get flooded out. They're not going to be the ones whose houses get blown away. They're not going to be the ones whose houses get burnt down. It's going to be the people who can't afford to protect themselves.
Yeah, it's really sad.
And I think the sooner it becomes clear that that the wealthy fossil fuel executives are only focused on themselves, I think the more likely we are to see really significant change in society. And that's going to feed into different political and socioeconomic problems as well. The other thing, just like another little fun fact about the US economy in particular. So, Trump during his inauguration speech said, "Drill, baby, drill." They were going to turn the taps on for oil, etc. So under Biden, the US has never exported more oil before, right? And so Trump coming in saying we're going to export even more oil is actually really bad for the oil and gas companies from a supply and demand perspective, because the more supply out there, the lower the cost of oil. So they're actually making less money by producing more oil. So economically, it makes 0 sense, right? Which is just like a perfect summation of him as an individual. Like, he has no capability to think through what he's saying. He just says the headline thinking it will be very catchy. Yeah, but in actual fact is making his constituents worse off through his actions.
He's a really basic bitch. Yeah.
True story.
So my last question. All these countries, they implement it, like you said, with all the businesses and stuff, and the agreement with all the countries around the world, with the UN, like you were explaining before. Who's to say that we all follow this in years to come, and then say America, China, and Russia goes, nah, we're not adding that. Global warming's made up. We want our money and our oil and stuff like that. If all the rest of the countries are doing it, and then you've got these other 3 big countries that are not, and they have such a big population, bigger than all the other smaller countries, then how does that work on Earth? Because the pollution will still be going into the atmosphere and stuff. So it's like, is it even worth it if they're not following along with the other countries?
Really good question. Really good question. So I think, at least for the next 4 years, we can write the US off. At the federal level, though, and it's really important that when people talk about the US, that they realize we're talking at the federal level, not the state level. So,
which means what again?
So
federal means...
Federal is the national government.
Okay.
At the state level, we're talking about the 50 states of the US. And in the US Constitution, there is very, very clear divisions between what a federal government has control over and what a state government has access over. So in California, for example, if California was its own country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world.
Fully, 100%.
Right?
And I know that.
And so California is one of the leaders in the world when it comes to climate change and climate action. So I guess the reason why I say that is, like, we see Trump and what he's doing, taking the US out of the Paris Agreement, which he did in 2017. We see what he's doing at the EPA. We see what he's doing at NOAA in terms of like firing people, but that's being challenged through the courts. But at the state level, there is a massive pushback in the US to ensure that they're still on track for their targets. Russia signed the Paris Agreement, but their entire economy is built on oil, so they want the Arctic ice to melt because it opens up new oil fields for them under that ice. However, China's really interesting, right? So China, and this is where I think the US has made a lot of missteps when it comes to geopolitics and economic opportunity. So China produces the most emissions of any country each year.
Yep.
However, they also produce the most renewable energy of any country per year. And they are on an enormous transition to a green economy. So under the Paris Agreement, each country has pledged to hit net zero by 2050, which means that take in all the fossil fuels they burn and then take in all the renewables that they produce, and you basically get to net zero. That's like a very simplistic high level.
Yeah, but they realize that they probably had to because there's a billion of them and they can't see because there's so much pollution from a billion cars being everywhere.
Correct. So they're not going to do...
choice.
They're not going to do 2050, they're going to do 2060. However, they realized very early on that the electric vehicle market was one that was ripe for picking, because they knew that the US automakers weren't going to be able to move quick enough to redesign their cars. They also knew that there was going to be a fight for critical minerals. So we're talking like copper, lithium, cobalt, etc., that goes into these batteries, which is why over the past 10 to 15 years, they've been going into African nations and saying, we want to mine your minerals, but we'll also build you new highways, we will build you schools, we will build you hospitals. So they now have access to all of these critical minerals so that they can build their electric vehicles. BYD is now
Yes, I've been in one. A lot of them in Sydney when you get an Uber.
So BYD is now the highest selling electric vehicle in the world because Tesla is crashing because Elon.
BYD is also cheaper, but yeah.
Cheaper, correct.
Yeah.
And so they have this mass scale play where they're going to be able to build solar panels, batteries, and electric vehicles. So China's actually positioning themselves to be the leader of this green transition. And by the US taking themselves out of the Paris Agreement, they're actually just ceding all of this economic opportunity to what is meant to be their largest global competitor.
So China's smart, knowing it's going this. It's better for the environment, and we're also going to become richer than you because we're thinking ahead, because this is where it's going to go. Oh, and oil and all that's going to run out one day anyway, so you have to convert over.
No. I mean, yeah, and look, like the sustainability space is one full of contradictions, right? And people will say solar panels create waste. Wind turbines create waste, even though there's e-waste recycling options for them. You've got child labor in the supply chains of EV companies. All of that is true, right? But it comes down to, from a greater good perspective, do we keep doing what we've been doing and end up where we know we're going to end up? Or do we try to do something different in order to ensure that we give ourselves the best opportunity for success? And it's a wicked problem, but I think it's very clear what direction we need to go in.
Very well said, and very good way to end the show. And one thing I wanted to end this episode with you, Dan, is obviously Captain Planet, which we both grew up on. The cartoon.
Amazing.
Is Captain Planet big in America and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Or was it just Australia?
No, it's huge in America.
For any of the listeners out there, as you know, Captain Planet, he's our hero, going to take pollution down to zero. I don't even know the rest of the things, but as you know, it's a cartoon, and it's weird because growing up, that come out in, I think it was like 1991 till 1995.
Yeah.
And it was such a big cartoon. But if you watch it back now, it's all about sustainability.
It is.
And it's all about saving Earth, and it's all about pollution, and it's all about, I remember them talking about recycling, your cardboard and plastic before we even had the bins to recycle. Because when I was younger, we didn't have those bins. It was just your one bin, put all your rubbish bin, and that's it. And they were like teaching us. So as a kid, that was in a cartoon so ahead of its time. So in my mind, before I did this interview with you, I was like, I wonder if Dan knew who created Captain Planet, and did they work in sustainability? Do you know?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but there's another bit to Captain Planet that I think is perfect for this conversation. So when I talk about working at a systems level, what that means is pulling ourselves out of any existing silos, and so that you can collaborate across multiple industries or multiple professions, multiple companies within the same industry. Captain Planet, right? How does he appear?
When we need him to save us, when everything's
going
to shit.
But what do they say?
Earth, fire, wind, water, all the shit that fucks up on Earth. Heart, that was me.
And then, with our powers combined, I am Captain Planet. And that is the key. Like, this has to be collaborative. No one can do it all on their own. And you get a lot of joy out of working with others through really difficult problems. In order for us to keep moving in the right direction.
So isn't it so ahead of its time?
Totally.
And just to give you the answer for you, Dan, and the listeners out there, Captain Planet and the Planeteers was created by Ted Turner and Barbara Pyle, and both were heavily involved in environmental initiatives, with Pyle even receiving the Saskakawa Environment Prize for her work. The show was aired from 1960 to 1996 and was conceived by Ted Turner, a media mogul, and produced by Barbara Pyle, who was Turner Broadcasting's Vice President of Environmental Policy at the time. And I know that Leonardo DiCaprio is trying to fund it to make it into a real-life movie, FYI, which would be really, really cool.
Wow.
So I hope he goes ahead with that. Guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. And Dan, thank you for coming on the show. You've made me a basic bitch to a fucking professional bitch with sustainability and global warming. And I hope the listeners got a lot out of it as well, because that's how I wanted to ask the questions that we wanted to know, but so I could understand it, because sometimes it gets lost when it just sounds really words that I don't know, and if I'm not in that industry, I don't know what they're talking about, and it just sounds like another language. But when you listen to it like this, it all makes sense of how we can make a difference. Guys, as I said before, Dan has a Substack newsletter that goes out, which is great, that I read. Anyone that doesn't have Substack, it's called Honey Drops, which is also his company as well. But he's also, if you enjoyed this interview, he's also just launched his own podcast called Green Fix, GREEN space FIX, on all of the Spotifys, the Apples, any of the streamers, correct? Have I left anything out?
Yeah.
You're up to episode 5?
Shout out to Pocket Casts as well.
Shout out to Pocket Casts as well. And please, if you want to know more about sustainability, or you are in sustainability, please listen to his podcast, because as you can see from this interview, he's so intelligent. Like, this is non-scripted, by the way. Everything we talked about, straight off the cards, as you can tell from my questions and the way that I speak. But he knows everything. He's so invested, and he's trying to make change in this world. And I think it's such a beautiful element for someone trying to do this, instead of just trying to make money. You can't bring your money to your grave. People don't realize this. Money's great, but not for the long term. But
is true.
We're going to end it out is Earth, fire, wind, water, heart. When your powers combine, I am Captain Planet. But you remember the rap? We're the Planeteers, you can be one too, because saving our planet is the thing to do. Polluting and polluting is not the way. Hear what Captain Planet has to say. The power is yours. And what that means is the power is of the human race. If we stick together to save Earth, we can live here. And I hope this episode will forever, who knows, someone who listens to this in 10, 15 years, let's see where the world's at. I hope, being in 2025 on March the 18th, 2025 right now, I really hope in 20 years from now that Earth is doing better, and we can look back at this episode in 20 years. This is the time capsule I want for this. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. My name is Sunny Boy. Your name is
Dan Leverington.
And thank you for listening to True Tall Tales. I will see you next week. Peace out. Bye. Thank you, Dan. Love ya.
I fucking love you, Sunny Joe. Thank you very much.
Bye.